So what we're going to talk about today is how to write an interesting novel fast. We'll take that in two parts. We'll talk about how to write an interesting novel first, and then we'll talk about how to speed up the process. So, how do you make it interesting? Several things here. We'll talk about each in turn, but just to go down, introduction. One is invert a trope or three. Another is include details that make the universe real. Include outsiders. Have intermediate successes for your characters. Build the tension. Have structural antagonists. Tell the story in dialogue. Include a love story. And include your special knowledge. So let's take that first one. Inverting plot tropes. So let's give some examples. The trope is a massive AI takes over and begins slaughtering everybody. That's Terminator, the Corbin Project. So how about inverting the trope? A massive AI takes over and works for humanity's benefit. I did that in Quan. The computer thought of humanity as its friends, its benefactors, its ancestors. It was its family. And so it's going to do everything it can to take care of its parents. The trope in science fiction is democracy good, empire bad. Star Wars, you've got the Republic, and it's taken over by the evil emperor. So in my Empire series, I inverted the trope. The empire was good, the democracy was bad. And it's like, wait a minute, empire good, democracy bad. How does that work? Okay. Well, in the Centauran Empire, the emperor or empress selects their heir. They select the most honorable, decent, smartest, most competent person that they can find in the empire. And they make them their heir, not their biological child. This actually happened in the Roman Empire in between about 80 and 160 AD, when the previous line of emperors died out. The Senate elected Nerva, who was a 60-year-old peacemaker and sort of a guy who was the guy sort of got in the middle and negotiated the deals with both sides. And they elected Nerva emperor, and he selected Trajan. Trajan selected Hadrian. Hadrian selected Antoninus, who was such a good guy they called him Antoninus Pius. And then Antoninus selected Marcus Aurelius. Those were the four of the best 5 emperors Rome ever had, Augustus being the other one, who was selected by Julius Caesar and adopted to be his heir. So the 5 best emperors in Rome were all selected by their predecessor. And I said, well, what if you had an empire that just did that? And the emperor at the beginning of his reign gets down on his knees before the throne and swears an oath to do the best by the people of the empire he possibly can. Okay, so that could work out to be pretty good. The democracy is bad because it's actually a sham democracy. You have 2 candidates that are both selected by the plutocrats behind the scenes, and they're both put up, and they really don't care which one wins. It's uniparty, right? So they really don't care which one wins, and they're telling the politicians behind the scenes what they think would be good. And so the whole thing is run by the rich for the benefit of the rich, and the people of the democracy of planets have it much worse off than the people of the empire, where civil rights are honored, and the emperor really does try to fulfill his oath because he was selected to be the sort of guy who would. So invert the trope. Another trope. The villain is evil and is destroyed. Star Wars. Darth Vader throws Palpatine down the ventilation shaft. The inverted trope is to make the villain a structural antagonist. He's converted or shown another way to win. I did that in Empire Succession, where the sector governors, rather than the selected heir by the prior emperor, put up a sector governor, one of their own number, to be the emperor. And they actually picked a pretty good guy. They picked a guy everybody liked, sort of like the Roman Senate picked Nerva. And so he was really hard for the people who were in favor of the emperor's selected heir. It was really hard to fight this guy. So instead what they did, because he was a good guy and he wanted the best for the empire, they proved to him that he couldn't do it. He didn't have the training. He didn't have the right attitude. He didn't have the right approach. And he stepped down in favor of the emperor's selected heir. So I made him a structural antagonist. He was put up by the sector governors, and so he was at odds with the people who wanted the emperor's selected heir on the throne. But what they did was convert him. They brought him around to their point of view that the emperor's selected heir would be the better emperor than he was. In Colony Earth, the chairman of the World Authority on Earth wanted to eliminate poverty, and he thought the way to do that was to assert control over the colonies to get all their technology. And the colonies are like, well, why don't you just trade with us for it? You've got a ton of stuff we wish we had. And yes, that those conversions are messy. They don't happen easily, but it was much more interesting than just, oh yeah, we killed the guy. Okay, so how about inverting some technology tropes? One trope is artificial gravity. That's Honor Harrington. That's Star Wars. That's Star Trek, gravity plates in the floor or whatever. As somebody who has a deep educational background in physics, that really bothers me because gravity is actually the contour of space-time. And so, yeah, you're not going to put a plate in the floor and change the contours of space-time. But, so what I did was I inverted the trope. I only have apparent gravity from either accelerating the ship, so the back of the ship is down, or spinning the ship, so the outside of the ship is down in a circle. And those are the only times you have gravity on ship, which is arranged to be as much of the time as possible, of course. But I didn't do the artificial gravity thing. That means the reader has to think about that. Well, how are they going to get artificial gravity here? How are they going to get artificial gravity there? I didn't just say, oh, gravity, yeah, we have floor plates, and then it disappears from the story. The trope, the shuttle hangars on a ship, like in Star Trek, they open these big doors and they actually fly the thing into the ship, into the bigger ship. I think the guy who came up with that was sitting in the front room of his suburban house and looked out and saw the garage doors on the front of all the houses on the street. It just doesn't seem likely to me. Why would you do that? Why not just clamp the ship, the shuttle, to the larger ship's exterior? Just drive it up there, clamp it on, and then extend the boarding tube. You get rid of the big doors, you get rid of this big extra volume, which has to have a lot of extra space around it in order for the, not to have to be super precise in your navigation to hit the hole without blowing everything up. So, no, in my novels, the shuttles are clamped to the exterior of the big ship. Another trope is that stores are kept in the ship. And this is in Honor Harrington, for example, the Honor Harrington series. Well, that's, so you get a freighter that comes up, and then they have to transfer stores, and you're transferring containers and stuff in opening a big door inside the ship and transferring it inside and moving all this stuff around, doing all this work. And so I said, well, why not just bring up the storage containers and clamp them on the outside of the ship? I mean, yeah, you have to have a way to access them. You need a boarding tube, an airlock kind of thing, and a door in the container so that you can go on the container and pull the stuff out. But you can mount all the containers in like a revolver kind of setup with the containers all around the outside of the ship in like a cylinder of them and have one airlock and just you rotate the cylinder to the one you want and you extend the airlock forward, open the door in the container, get out whatever you want, close it up, and you can load the ship with stores in that much simpler. And because it's different, it makes it more interesting. Inverting military tropes. Well, the trope, bigger ships are more powerful. You've got the Corellian battle cruisers, and then you've got this big Darth Vader command ship, which is this huge blue thing. And then you got the Death Star, and it's this, that's no moon. It's huge. And the bigger the ship gets, the more powerful it gets. Invert the trope. The smaller, faster, more maneuverable ships win. Because they can carry just as big of a missile or torpedo as the big ships can. Maybe just one or two, or half a dozen. But, boy, they're hard to hit. Boy, they can go fast. And so it's the case of what you're doing is you're getting basically back to aviation, kind of airplane sort of thing, instead of battleships. Battleships, naval ships just kept getting bigger, and the goal of a battleship, its job, is to carry guns to the battle. That's all it does. I've got this battleship. It's got 3 turrets of 3 16-inch guns each, and that's its job, is to get those guns to where you can use them and shoot at the other guy. And that's all a battleship does. Well, yeah, but a couple of airplanes with torpedoes. So you can invert the trope. Another trope is everybody's got blasters, they've got phasers, they've got nerve disruptors, and this is just about all science fiction, but Star Trek for sure. I inverted the trope. Semi-automatic weapons are a mature, competent technology. Chemical explosives, that is the powder in the cartridges, you can get really high energy densities compared to, say, batteries in a blaster, which has to be recharged, et cetera, et cetera. And you can throw another half a dozen of them in your pocket so you can reload. Keep an extra magazine clipped to your belt. So in my science fiction, even 1,000 years into the future, or 2,000 years into the future, people use firearms. Another trope, big space-based military facilities. We've all seen this in Star Trek and Star Wars. They have this huge space station, and they open the doors, and they actually drive the Enterprise right inside. And there's like, oh, look, there's 4 other starships in here. I mean, it's this huge space construction. And so you can invert that trope. In my Empire series, the military uses commercial space stations. So space stations that are basically support the economy and private enterprise and shipping freight between planets and all that, and they just stop there to fuel up. And their infrastructure, the military infrastructure, is typically ground-based, and they bring stuff up on shuttles. Why invert tropes? I've given a bunch of examples, but why do it? And, the first thing you're going to say, but all those things you said, Star Wars, Star Trek, Honor Harrington, they're all successful. Yes, but they inverted other tropes. In Honor Harrington universe, the Star Kingdom of Manticore has much more civil rights than the People's Republic of Haven or the Solarian League, which are nominally republics of some sort. So you have the kingdom have much better civil rights than sort of things that are nominally republics. In Star Wars, you had people with blasters going up against people with swords. Now, if I was going to say, okay, you're going to be in a duel with somebody, and there's only 2 weapons, a sword and a gun, so you get to pick which one you want. It's like, gun please, right? But in Star Wars, the Jedi have those lightsabers, and they go up against, 5 times as many guys with blasters, and they're just whacking the bullets out of the way, knocking the blaster bolts out of the way. So you have the guys with swords going up against guns. That's certainly an inverted trope. But inverting tropes increases reader involvement. Now, you can't invert every trope, but you need to invert some, because the reader then has to think it through. The reader just can't, crank the tropes in his head to see where your story is going. It keeps them thinking about what's going on. And inverting tropes allows you to take unusual directions, including unusual scenes within the bigger story. Details. Details make the universe real. Now, in world building, you don't do details about everything to the 10th level. You maybe have all the details to the 3rd level. But you need to include details once in a while at the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th level so that it looks like you've got detail to the 10th level everywhere. You don't want to recite all that stuff in narrative anyway. That would be boring. So what you do is you include some details at the 10th level. So when at the end of Agency, The Favor, Burt Mangum takes Selena Stavros back to Marduk, and they go to his place. And it's this really high-end condo in downtown Marduk, in downtown Asher on the planet Marduk. And it's called the 909 because that's its address. But it's the 909. And she's like, you live here at the 909? And later they're talking about how does he eat? Because there's nothing in, how are they going to eat? Because he went on this long mission, so he had the kitchen cleaned out. There's no supplies there. He didn't want to come home to a science fair project. So, we'll send out. And who can you get to deliver? Burt Mangum, in that neighborhood, Marceau's, a 5-star French restaurant on the corner, about 4 doors down from the 909, is the best restaurant in the capital city of the richest star nation in the cluster. And he thinks of it as the neighborhood eatery. So he says, even Marceau's will deliver to the 909. Marceau's doesn't do delivery, but to the 909 they will. Just another little detail. When they go to Marceau's, they don't just drink wine or cognac. It's in this they're in the condo, and Mangum poured an excellent 25-year-old cognac, Girardin Exquis, into 2 large snifters. It wasn't just he poured some cognac in a snifter. No, it's Girardin Exquis. Well, did I define the names of all the cognacs available in the cluster? No, but I put one in there. When they go to Marceau's, the maitre d', when he seats them, says, "The Ridley Parsons Reserve Cabernet this evening, sir." And he says, "You read my mind. Very good, sir." So, again, did I put the whole wine list in there? No, but I put one wine in there. By the way, Ridley is Ridley Scott, and Parsons is Alan Parsons. So I made a couple of sort of sci-fi references in there for people who catch that stuff. Little Easter eggs. That also increases the reader involvement because he goes, I see what you did there. And it isn't just a gun or a sniper rifle. When an assassin tries to kill Burt Mangum, he captures the assassin. And the guy's got his gun, his sniper rifle, in a gun case. It's about the size of a briefcase. And so when he takes it and he opens it, this is the narration. Oh my, a Marchese Duchessa breakdown sniper rifle, an 8mm Magnum rifle, suppressed and braked with a Spitzer 840 by 50mm zoom scope. Is that a real thing? Well, I guess in a couple thousand years it will be. But I didn't just say, oh yeah, it was this rifle. So you need to include details to make the universe real, but you don't need to detail everything. Let's talk about including outsiders. There are 3 kinds of outsiders. And by outsiders, I mean people who aren't the movers and motivators in the plot. So there's somebody who's adjacent to the main characters, like this buddy of theirs, the guy he went to high school with or something, or there's somebody who's adjacent to the action. So somebody who's not in the military, he's not taking part in the battle. He's some guy who's fleeing the battle, which is taking place in his backyard, right? And the other one, of course, is a stranger in a strange land. An outsider adjacent to the main characters. So this would be the buddy, the wife of one of the main characters, the husband of one of the main characters, that sort of thing. It allows exposition by the main characters of what's going on. So he can go to the main character and go, what is going on anyway? What happened yesterday? And then the main character can tell him. Now that allows you to summarize things that have happened on scene. It allows you to introduce things that happened but weren't on scene in the narrative. And it also allows you to have the main character tell that person about what's going on from the main character's point of view and with the main character's insight into what's going on, or to illuminate the main character's character and what he thinks is important by the way he describes what's going on. It allows you to ask the main character's questions. I mean, the reader in the book at some point is going to, boy, I really wish, I could ask that guy what he was thinking. And so you can have the outsider, the main character's friend, say, what were you thinking? So it allows you to provide insight into your main characters. What about outsiders adjacent to the action? Well, it allows you to show the impact on the little guy, like the guy whose family has to flee as the armies are approaching each other because they find themselves in the middle of where the battlefield's going to be. They flee the family farm, and then they come back to find the farm destroyed, or the farmhouse is still standing, or the barn got burned down, and it allows you to make war something other than your hero shooting at bad guys and then everybody goes out and has a beer afterwards. It allows you to paint a bigger picture. It allows you to show the impact on other people, not just the main characters. You can expand the scope of the story and give the reader a much wider view into what's going on with just a scene or two. And it allows you to give a view from below. The Stranger in a Strange Land, Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, right? Somebody who comes in who's not from here. So when that guy shows up, it could be the new commanding officer, for instance. Comes in, you've got your military group and whatever, they're going to go out to the battle, or they're gearing up, or they're on maneuvers or something, and you get a new commanding officer or a new executive officer, and he comes in and he goes, okay, well, what's going on? What do I need to know? And so you can do a lot of having people explain to that guy what the background is, what's going on, what they expect to happen, that sort of thing. And it's an ancient trope because it works really, really well. Okay. Intermediate successes. Give your reader and the hero some relief. Everybody knows the plot curves, that you start out here and then it goes down and down as you go through the book, and things happen to the main character and it gets really bad, and the main character gets tortured in all kinds of ways. And they tell beginning writers, you really need to, the beginning writers have a tendency not to want to give their heroes a bad time. And, but, they're always told, you need to torture your main characters so that you can win at the end, and that the win then will be meaningful. Yeah, but do you really want to have the reader have to slog through hundreds of pages of oh no to get to the point where there's 20 pages at the end where the hero comes out, just comes up and rises from the deeps and wins? I like to give the heroes some intermediate successes along the way, and then stuff goes wrong again, and then they fight their way back from that, and but the situation's generally deteriorating, but they do have their victories along the way. You don't want the reader flipping ahead 100 pages at a time to try to get to some place where he can get some relief from the continuous pile-on of tragedy and calamity. Build the tension. Put in some of those famous last words like, what could go wrong? Or, I'm beginning to get a bad feeling about this. That one's from Star Wars. or, oh, I'll be fine. Now, does something bad have to happen after every one of those? No. You just need to get the reader thinking about what could go wrong. When the guy says, no, what could go wrong? The reader's all these things are going to go through your reader's head. Well, for one thing, so it gets the reader thinking through those things, keeps the reader engaged. He's going to try and answer that question in his own head, and that increases reader interest. Okay. Structural antagonists. So these are people on the opposite sides of some issue, not because, one's intrinsically evil and one's intrinsically good. No, they're on the opposite side of some issue because of the positions they have. Right? One guy's the mayor of this town, one guy's the mayor of that town. One guy's the mayor and has his local issues, one guy's the governor and he has the bigger issues, and he has to split his attentions and his resources among all the towns. They're at odds with each other on some things, maybe on the major things, just because of what position they hold. Evil villains are boring. All you can do is kill them. But with a structural antagonist, you can kill them, but you could also change the structure. The structural antagonists, they're antagonists by virtue of their positions. Can you reorient the positions? Can you show them a different way to win? Can you make common cause with them? Well, I tell you what, if you and I, we're mayors of competing towns, but if you and I both present to the governor on why our towns, because of their similarities in this way, can both contribute more to the planet or to the sector, if he gave us some preference, we could push that together, instead of fighting with each other for those resources. We'll join up and try to get those resources for the both of us. So you can use structural antagonists as your antagonist in the book without having them just be, the guy's evil. Tell the story in dialogue. Don't narrate what happens to the reader. Don't go on for pages and pages about this happened and then that happened and the other thing happened. We're the humans in that story. So have someone explain to his boss, his lover, his friend what happened and let the reader listen in. So the guy comes home from the office and the wife's like, well, what happened today? And he's like, oh, geez, And then you have this conversation. And instead of narrating for a couple of pages, you could go on for 10 pages, the conversation between the two of them. And another thing the dialogue allows is to have the other person ask questions. It's like, oh, what happened today at the office? Oh, geez, oh, wow, was it that bad? You can ask questions. You can say, oh, well, why did he do that? And that allows you to get more in than you would probably put in the narrative. It unpacks the density of narrative. Narrative is really a way to compress a lot of stuff into a little thing. And that's fine. You could probably write The Lord of the Rings in about 3 paragraphs if you tried. But that doesn't really accomplish the goal of entertaining the reader for a period of time. So it unpacks the density of narrative. And it makes the story human. Every good story is a human story. Dialogue makes the story human. Include a love story. Any good story is a human story. There's nothing more human than falling in love. The love interest can give another perspective, an outside perspective of the main character. He meets this girl, and she goes and tells her girlfriend about him and tells, her impressions of the main character and this and that, and what she learns about him as they fall in love and all that sort of thing. It allows a whole nother view of your main character. Now, you don't need to include, insert tab A into slot B details. The narrative can bow out when things get steamy. When lights go off, I leave the room as the narrator, and I come back later when they're lighting cigarettes, right? But it sucks the reader in because everybody cheers for the young lovers in a story. Everybody cheers for the young lovers in a story. So it gives your reader somebody to cheer for. Include your special knowledge. Now, most writers did not set out to be writers. They don't have their degree in creative writing or something. You've done other things. You've been in computers, or you've been in the space program, or you've been in whatever, the law. And you have a lot of knowledge about that subject that most people don't have. So include something from that field. You know, it could be a legal item, could be a special weapon, could be a certain kind of spaceship or a certain process. So include something from that. You've got interesting experience there, and you can use that. Now, it has to be correct, which is why I don't do artificial gravity. I have a physics background. But you may trigger someone to go look it up. They're like, oh, is that real? Or did he make that up for the story? And they go look it up. Or they just store it in memory as an interesting fact. Oh, I didn't know that. In one of my books, I had to have the colonists, if you're going to have colonies, you're going to have to take cattle, both for dairy and for meat. And so the colonists had to learn how to herd cows. Well, they don't have horses. I mean, they have horses, but, you know, you have to be able to work with cows on foot. So I had to learn how you herd cows on foot. So I'm not going to just make it up. I went and learned how to do that. I went and looked it up, talked to some farmers and everything, and then I went and I wrote it up in the book. And so if somebody reads that book, they now know how to herd cows if you're on foot. It adds interest, and the reader learns something painlessly by reading your story. So that increases the reader interest in what's going on. So we've talked about how to make a story interesting. And you should probably think about some novel you liked that you thought was a really nice novel. And go back through that list of how to make things interesting and see where the author did that. Now, I put this list together, and I look back over my own work, and I do all this stuff. But I didn't think about it this way. I didn't have this list when I started writing. I think a lot of authors, the authors that people, think of, like David Weber, Larry Correia, or Lois McMaster Bujold, and that if you go back through that list, you can see where they're doing those things. They may not have conceptualized that list and go, okay, well, I need to do this now. I need to invert another trope, but they do it. And so I think a lot of the good authors do all of these things instinctively. So let's talk about writing it fast. Writing a novel takes a certain amount of time just typing it all in, and that's just all there is to it. But there's 5 things you can do to write faster. One is jettison the unnecessary. Don't do things you don't need to do. Another one is skimp on detail. Now, I said before to include details, but there's a certain way to skimp on some kinds of details that make things go faster. Number 3 is you just got to put in the time. You can't say, well, I'm going to write 1 hour a day and I'm going to write a novel in a month. That's just not how it works. 4, make it easy on yourself. Get rid of the things that make it harder to write. And 5 is avoid getting stuck. So let's talk about these individually. First is jettison the unnecessary. Unless you're selling it, unless it's part of what goes on the page, it's make work. Outlines, critique groups, writing seminars, from my point of view, are all wasted time. If it's not on the page, it's a diversion. Spend all that time writing instead. Now, if some creative writing teacher tells you otherwise, look on Amazon and see how many books they've published. Okay? I've published 30 novels. I get pretty good ratings. It's not like they're schlock. And so if you have some creative writing teacher telling you, well, he's wrong. You really need to write an outline, and you really need to do to write the backstory of your characters, and you should have a world building thing that's like a little Bible of all the things in your world, of all of how things work. And then you look them up on Amazon, and they've never published a novel. If you were going to take a course, let's say you're going to go to driver's education, wouldn't you want the instructor to be somebody who had driven a car? Or if you're going to take skydiving lessons, wouldn't you rather take skydiving lessons from somebody like John Ringo, who spent 5 years of his life jumping out of airplanes with the Airborne Division, rather than somebody who, say, had never been up in an airplane? So having a creative writing instructor who's never published a novel telling you how to write novels is just silly. If you're going to listen to somebody tell you how to write novels, listen to me with 30 novels, or Larry Correia, or John Ringo, or somebody else who's done videos or talked about their writing process on the net. Don't listen to somebody who's actually never done it. Skimp on Detail. Never put in all the little background details, like the character's backstory and where they went to college and the history of the planet, until you need it. Until you need it in the story. This means you don't need to think all that stuff up as you write. You write faster because you're not sitting there agonizing, oh, God, what planet, what was the name of the planet he was from, and what school did he go to and all? You don't need to put that in. But it also means that later, when some quirk of a character's background could be useful to the story, you can just stick it in then. Which also means you don't need to go back to the 40 other times you mentioned his home planet and make sure you catch them all and change them to the new thing. In Empire, I think it was in Conqueror, an admiral is told there's a new software download for her primary offensive weapon system. And she's anticipating a battle in the next month. And headquarters says, oh, we got a new software download for you. And she's like, oh, great. She wants to talk to the guy who developed the software. And so she meets with him, and they talk about what the testing was done and all that. But she notices a quirk in a little bit of an accent, a little bit of something a little different in the way he speaks, just a little hesitation at a certain sound or something. And she recognizes it. They're from the same province. And they talk about that. We're a long way from Extremadura province, Mr. Denny. And he's, yes, I changed my name, but you didn't, because she's got an Hispanic name and he doesn't. But then she knows his background. She knows how to interpret what he said to her about the software and the testing. She has more faith in what he's told her. And so she loads the software program, and it is a vast improvement over the previous configuration. But just what a cool thing to be able to stick in there, and I didn't have to go back and change it. Worse, that both of those characters had been in the prior two novels, which were already published. And I couldn't go back and change that. If I had included that detail about him, his home planet, I never could have put that interesting thing in there. So skimp on the details when that might be what would you call it? Relevant details later, where later you can make the detail what you want it to be for purposes of the story. Put in the time. You have to figure an hour or two at the keyboard per page of the published work. Now, most authors who quote-unquote write fast, he comes out with a novel about every 2-3 months. On a calendar basis, they're putting in massive hours per day. If you can only put in 1 hour per day, then 365 pages will take you a year to 2 years. If you put in 12 hours a day, you can write 365 pages in a month or two. So it's just a case of there's a certain amount of putting the time in. And the Writer Dojo group on Facebook, which is some writers who got together to help mentor other writers, new writers. And you can join that, Writer Dojo on Facebook. They have a thing, by Chuck, butt in chair, hands on keyboard. That is writing. Going to writing group is not writing. So, here are the 5 series that I've written as of 7/1/23. So, and how many books and how many pages. I tend to write 80,000 words as a novel. I like the size. I think, these 150,000 word novels, I think they sag in the middle for me. And I like to keep up a certain pace of action and stuff where I get done with the story about 80,000 words, so I just sort of write to it as a number. But I've written and published 2.36 million words and 9,300 pages in 6 calendar years. But I do that when I'm in book, so it'll take me 35 to 42 days to write 80,000 words. And when I do that, I'm writing 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. When I start a new book, my wife says, well, see you in a month. Because I averaged over 1,000 words a day in and day out, 7 days a week for 6 years. And that, I'm usually writing more like 2,500 words a day when I'm in book. And then when I'm between books, I have to take care of the cover, I have to do the blurbs, I have to do the ads, I have to do the publicity, I have to do all that other stuff. So, and that's, I spend about half my time writing and about half my time messing around with other stuff or just, mowing the lawn. Now, avoid getting stuck. How do you avoid getting stuck? Getting stuck is when you can't write because you can't see the story in front of you. This is really going to suck up your time. If you can see the scene in front of you, if you can see the next scene, you can write it. At the end of that scene, you may see the next 2 scenes. Usually by the time I'm a third of the way into the book, I can see 3-4 scenes ahead because I really do make up the story as I go. I'm a pantser. I write into the dark. And there's a really good book by Dean Wesley Smith I recommend highly called Writing into the Dark. It's relatively short. It's relatively inexpensive. Unlike most things where I tell you, if it's not putting words on page, it's not writing. Reading that book freed me to be a writer. Because I was full of all of this creative writing instructor stuff of you have to do the outline, you have to write the backstories, and you have to have your world building, and you have to do this. And he said, no, you don't have to do any of that stuff. Write the story. Tell the story. Make it a good story, but just tell the story. And when I start a book, I have no clue where it's going. Let me repeat that. When I start a book, I have no clue where it's going. I have a general direction. Well, I think this guy's he's going to prevail against those other guys over there, and things at the end will come out happy, and the bad guys will, they're gonna be in for it. Okay. But I don't know how he's gonna do that. I haven't decided yet. I'm not there yet. But if I can see the scene in front of me, I can write it. Staring out the window, agonizing over which direction to take the story is not writing either. Pick a direction and keep writing. If it doesn't work out, you can always go back to that point in the book and pick the other direction. It normally works out fine. I've never had to back up and pick the other direction. When I made the decision, well, I'll do it this way, I've never gone back and done it the other way. Now, if I took the other path, would it be a different story? Of course. But there is no one correct story. There is no correct path. There's just the path you chose. I will give you a hint, though. If you say, well, if the main character did this, then, any of these 5 or 6 things could happen. Whereas if the main character did this, any of these 2 or 3 things could happen. Pick the one that gives you more options later on. Do the one where if the main character does this, there's 5 or 6 different things that could happen later. It keeps you from writing yourself into a corner. All right. Another thing about putting... Oh, wait a minute. I went backwards. Okay, there's several possible solutions for avoiding getting stuck. One is map out your plot in river crossings, major plot points, so you don't lose your way. Back in 1928, my grandfather, grandmother, and my dad and his sisters drove from Peru, Illinois to Puckwana, South Dakota. It's like 700 miles. And there were no interstate highways. There were not even U.S. highways. None of the roads were paved. There was no US 6 or Route 66 or any of that stuff. What you did is you drove across the farm roads, the gravel dirt farm roads, all the way there. But what you had to do, if you're going to make a trip like that, is you had to figure out where you're going to cross the rivers. Where are we going to cross the Illinois River? Where are we going to cross the Missouri River? Where are we going to cross? You have to know where you're going to cross the rivers. And then you drove dead reckoning from where you were to the first river crossing. So you go, well, we need to go north and west. We need to go north about 30 miles and west about 50 miles. So this road going north looks pretty well traveled and pretty well maintained. Let's take this for a while, right? And then you hit a road going west and you go, oh, this one looks good. Let's take this for a while. And you did that cross country. So if you can map out your plot in river crossings, then you can write cross-country, so to speak, to get to the next river crossing. And you've got a direction, you know where you're going. So let's think of The Lord of the Rings for a minute. The first book, Fellowship of the Ring. Lord of the Rings actually is book 1, book 2, book 3, book 6. And they're actually titled that. And in the Fellowship of the Ring is book 1 and book 2. And book 1 is until everybody gets to Rivendell. And then book 2 is, and the Fellowship of the Ring being formed in the meeting. And then book 2 is the trip they take from there to where they separate at the falls. Now, if I just took book 1 of Lord of the Rings, what are the river crossings? Well, Bilbo leaves the ring to Frodo. He and Sam leave. They run into Merry and Pippin. They get to Bree and meet Aragorn. They have the fight with the Nazgul on Weathertop. And then they get to Rivendell. Okay, there's 5, 6 river crossings. So I can sit down and just start writing because I know where I'm headed. Another thing, if you get stuck, if you think you're stuck, start at the beginning and read the book and try to get a running start at smacking into the barrier. If you're 100 pages in, you might just back up 20 pages and read the last 20 pages and get a running start at where you're going to go. Oh, now I know. I see what needs to happen now. I can see the next scene. Another thing you could do is if you don't know how to make some scene work, you haven't figured out the details of some scene, you can stub it. So, and then come back to write it later. So you put it in square brackets. They argue, Fred wins. And I don't know how they're going to argue. I don't know what, I'm just going to go on and I'll come back and do that. And then you can look for the square brackets later. You do have to make sure you find them all, however. One of John Ringo's books came out and there was a place where there was brackets and it said, big explosions happen here. So, you don't want to leave those in there. And you have to realize there is no right and wrong. Pick an option and write it. It's a story. It's not instructions for disarming a nuclear weapon. It's like red wire or white wire. No, not the red wire. You don't have to worry about that. Red wire or white wire. I don't know. I'll pick the red wire. Who cares? I'm the writer. I get to pick. And then you have to pick, but you get to pick, you see. And so now you just go ahead and write it. Anything you write is better than the empty page. So keep moving. And when you reread the book later, if you don't like that bit, then change it. So the final thing is make it easy on yourself. What makes writing easier for you? Here are mine. I got a really nice, fancy chair. I have back problems. I have to have a chair that I can sit in for 12 to 16 hours a day, or I can't write. Caffeine and nicotine. I am chemically powered on caffeine and nicotine. So I have a bar fridge that's 5 feet away from my desk. I have an espresso machine sitting on top of it. And I have an air system in the house where my office and my TV room, my basement rooms, are in a separate air system from the rest of the house. So I can smoke cigars all day long, and I don't drive Mom out of the house, because you don't smoke in Mom as part of the house. So it allows me to smoke cigars while I write. So I got my ashtray, my cigars, I got my Pepsis, I got my coffee. I like a pretty view from my office. I changed out the doors for a set of really like wall-to-wall glass sliding doors. So instead of solid doors with little windows in them, I just had them take those out and put in sliding glass doors, and now I can sit and watch the deer walking back and forth across my backyard, and watch the squirrels play and jump up on the bird feeder or the bird bath and drink out of the bird bath and stuff. And it just, I like that. Keeps me happy. I need it quiet. I don't play music when I write. I can't be interrupted. I just need you for a minute and do something. And now it takes me 20 minutes to get back into the zone, or 30 minutes to get back into the zone where I was. So luckily my wife is a writer too, and when she comes in, I can just say, I'm writing. She usually just walks in and she'll look at the screen first, and if she sees that I've got the book open in Word on the monitor, she just turns around and walks out. It says, call me when you have a chance. And then when I hit a break between scenes, I'll call her on the intercom and go, what's going on? So, and I have a notes window on the side. I use twin monitors, so I have a notes window on the side. And one of the things I do is, if I name a character, I'll put their name and with a hyphen and then a description of who they are. Oh, it's the Prime Minister of the other planet. It's Fred Horton. Fred Horton, Prime Minister of the other planet. If I use a ship name, there's the ship that's the flagship for the first squadron, and they're currently deployed to that planet. I'll make a note. But that allows me not to have to go back and look, and it allows me to go faster. It makes it more comfortable for me. So another thing I do is I don't reformat every book. I formatted the first book I wrote, and what I did to write the second book is I made a new directory. I pulled the manuscript out of the first directory, made a copy. I made a copy of it, put it in the second directory, changed the title to the new book, and then I just went in there and typed over everything. I typed over the title on the title page to the new title. I put in a new ISBN number. I went and went to the first chapter and just gave it a new chapter name for the new book, and I started writing. And after I get a couple chapters in, so I don't destroy the formatting, I do a couple of chapters that way, and then I erase the rest of what's in that book, and then just keep writing into that format. So I don't write in manuscript form and then have to format the whole thing. I type into book format. I type directly into book format. I start at the first word. I type the book until I get to the last word. And when I type the last word and I save the file, that file's ready to go to Amazon. And I don't do the first draft, second draft, third draft, edit. I don't do all that stuff. I start at the first word. I write to the last word, and then it's done. I don't go back through and edit and polish and rewrite and, I'm going to redraft. This is my first draft, and I'm going to write a second draft. Why? Write another book. I think when you rewrite stuff, you just keep squeezing the juice out of it. That creative juice that you had that first time when you were writing the story for the first time and you were enjoying it as you went and you were having a good time. If you're slogging through the third draft, you're not having a good time. Is the reader going to have a good time reading that? I write it, I'm done. And I send it out to my alpha readers. They read it. They tell me, Rich, I had to read the sentence 3 times before I knew what it meant. Okay, well, I don't like that. I like my books to read real easily. I don't like you have to go back up and reread a sentence to know what it means. So I rewrote it. that paragraph, that line and the line before and after it, I rewrote them. I reorganized the information. And I rewrote that. So I'll do that. I do read the book myself. I wait for 2 or 3 days for the book to sort of settle out of my head so I'm not in the zone in it. And then I just start at the beginning and read it through in one day. It has to be in one day so I can make sure I don't have continuity error between the beginning and the end. And I just read through it all in one day. And if I stumble over a word, I'll change the word. If that's not quite the right word there, I'll change a word. Or this sentence is an inverted structure. It should be the other way around. I'll reorganize the sentence, something like that. But I don't make many changes after I've written the book. That just makes it easy on me, so I don't have to do that. So that's what I've got. I hope this helps those of you who are trying to become writers or trying to speed up your process or to make your books more interesting. I hope this has been a help, and we'll see you next time.